people in the House of Commons who don't know where Saudi Arabia is on the map have approached me over the last year or so, and especially in the last few weeks, asking about the Hijaz and Najd. I was astonished. How do they even know these terms? Suddenly they learned these terms. Why? Because already they're thinking, maybe we have to divide what is called Saudi Arabia. The second ploy is to create an entirely false dichotomy between the Arabs and Iran. The painting of Iran as some kind of devil, some kind of demon that's somehow sitting up late at night planning how to convert all of you to their brand of Islam. The zoological metaphor, the elephant in the corner of the room, which I haven't yet mentioned, is sectarianism. The division of the Arabs, not this time between fake states, but the division of the Arabs into confessional, sectarian difference, which can become so profound if acted upon that it acts as a means of turning the Muslims against each other, of fighting even each other, of vying with each other to ally themselves with the Western countries that have come up with this plan. And I've got to tell you, the melancholy truth is that it's already beginning to look like the Arabs will fall for Sykes-Picot too, just as so many of them did fall for Sykes-Picot 1. And if I'm right in that fear, then the Arabs will have no better a century in the 21st than they had in the 20th century. So it's part of my mission in life is to beg the Arab street not to be fooled again. You know, George Bush famously said, though he missaid it, if you've seen Fahrenheit 9/11, fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. And that's how I feel about this, ladies and gentlemen. If they fool you for a second time, shame not on us but on you. How are they achieving this? First of all, by completely exaggerating the importance of the differences between Sunni and Shiite Muslims, which are pre-existing, no doubt, which are ancient and historic, no doubt, which are serious at times, no doubt, theological, cultural differences, but not nearly as great as the differences between, say, the Arabs as a whole and Israel, or the Arabs as a whole and the imperial powers that are stealing the wealth of all the Arabs, whether they're Sunni or Shia. These differences which exist are being exacerbated deliberately, are being worked on by men who don't even know the difference between Sunni and Shia, would struggle even to find a dictionary definition for that difference. But what they know is if they support the Shiites here, they can achieve their goals and objectives, and if they support the Sunnis here, they can achieve their goals and objectives, and even better, they can make the Sunnis in this country feel that the Shiites in that country and vice versa are their enemies. Then, eureka, you've done it again. As long as the Muslims are fighting each other, hating each other, fearing each other, they won't notice that their wealth is being stolen from underneath their noses, that their countries are being occupied, that foreign armies are literally present in their capital cities. Jerusalem is in the hands of a foreign army. The Arabs are doing nothing about it. And they'll never do anything about it if you keep them busy on a sectarian basis. And of course, it's not just existing differences amongst the Muslims that they are working on. In Egypt, we're told, though anyone who's ever been in Cairo and sees the mosques and the churches cheek by jowl next door to each other, or who goes into a shop, says Salamu Alaikum, is answered Alaikum Salam by a Christian shopkeeper, would necessarily believe it. We're told that Egypt is fundamentally divided between Christians and Muslims. Neither should you fall for the canard that the West has a preference of one kind of Muslim over another. They couldn't give a damn. They were happy to support the Shiite government of al-Maliki in Iraq, even where that Shiite government was hated by the Sunni minority in the country. Equally, they'll support Sunni jihadists and encourage them in their quest to overthrow this or that regime on the basis that it is somehow heretic, somehow Shiite or Alawiyin or whatever. A brazen example of this is in Bahrain, the revolution nobody talks about, where the existence of a majority Shiite population is held by many Sunnis in the streets as well as in the government headquarters as a reason not to support the Bahraini revolution, as a reason to wish the defeat of the Bahraini revolution, because what would it produce? It would produce a Shiite government. Well, no, if the revolution succeeded and we had one man, one woman, one vote in Bahrain, we'd have a government of the people's choosing, which is what we're after everywhere, isn't it? But when did you last see the Bahraini revolution on most of the Arab satellite channels, including those satellite channels that now carry virtually nothing except the Syrian revolution and the response, the reaction to that Syrian revolution? Those satellite stations who represent small countries which act as the agents of the imperial system in the Arab world are merely reflecting what the Western powers would like them to do. Much more worrying, for that is understandable, much more worrying is that when you go into a cafe or stop to speak to someone in the street in Arab capitals, as I do, visiting them all the time, from the Atlantic to the Gulf, is the number of ordinary people who have fallen for this. The second ploy is to create an entirely false dichotomy between the Arabs and Iran. The painting of Iran as some kind of devil, some kind of demon that's somehow sitting up late at night planning how to convert all of you to their brand of Islam. Over the last 6-7 years, I've grown to know Iran and Iranians very well. I never met an Iranian who's planning to convert you to Shiism. I've met lots of Iranians who are determined to assist the Palestinian struggle to be victorious. I've met lots of Iranians who are interested in supporting the Lebanese resistance against Israeli occupation and in support of the liberation of Palestine. But I never met one who I recognized as entertaining any dark thought of converting Palestine to Shiism. Now, the truth is this: whatever minor differences of theology or culture exist between Sunnis and Shiites, they are minor compared to the much more important differences which I have been describing both this evening and in the last show. Those differences, which were themselves exacerbated by Sykes-Picot, were a remarkably successful ploy which succeeded for the best part of 100 years. And you know this in Lebanon better than anywhere else in the Arab world. Countries which didn't exist became flags to die for. People who once were Arabs from Bilad al-Sham were turned against each other on the basis of nationalities given to them by others, and within that, of ethnicities and confessional and sectarian identities, which existed, of course, when this whole area was Bilad al-Sham, but which have been elevated to a point where they're worth dying for, where even the Sykes-Picot national identity is sublimated, becomes secondary to the sectarian identity. Now, your whole political system is built around that. I remember once clashing with the British Foreign Minister, then Margaret Beckett, in the House of Commons. You can watch it on YouTube, in which she hailed democracy in Lebanon. Well, I said up to a point, but of course, there's not actual democracy in Lebanon, is there? If there was actual democracy in Lebanon, Said Hassan Nasrallah would be the president. But he can't be the president because he's not a Christian. Okay, he'd be the prime minister. No, he can't be the prime minister because he's a Sunni. He can't even be the Speaker of the Parliament because he's not a member of the Parliament. But you get the point that I'm making. Sectarianism has been actually built in to your constitution. And of course you can't have a census because a census would reveal the actual balance of confessionalism, of sectarianism in the country, and that would make the whole problem worse. Now, don't get me wrong, I love Lebanon. I'd much rather be in Lebanon than anywhere else in the world, actually, never mind the Arab world. But I'm making the point to you that if you're honest, you'll agree that Lebanese politics is driven by confessionalism, by sectarianism. And I lived here in Fakani when the streets were running with blood in 1977, shed in part on a confessional basis. And I'm here to argue with you that you should avoid this Sykes-Picot 2 at all costs. Because it's going to lead to the breakup of your countries. It's going to lead to alliances which become ossified, almost like the East-West Cold War divide, which divided Europe for more than half a century. You're going to be encouraged in Orwellian terms in the novel 1984. You'll remember how Big Brother used to appear on everybody's screen every day for an hour of hatred, to whip up the hatred of the people against the other, so that they didn't bother themselves asking how come Big Brother is ruling over us here in our own country. That's what it's going to lead to. And it may even lead to war. Which brings me to Syria. In my last show, you will have seen a very large number of people in the audience had become fixated upon the civil conflict in Syria, to the point that they were absolutely blinded to the blindingly obvious. People imagined, especially when I discussed it with them after the show outdoors, that Britain and America were intervening in Syria in the interests of human rights. How could that possibly be? Britain and America are the biggest supporters of dictatorship in the Arab world before and now. Some people thought that the reason for the enmity towards Syria was because it had one family rule. Well, every single member of the Kuwaiti cabinet has the same name. Every ruler in the history of Saudi Arabia comes from the same family. So it really can't be that, can it? It can't be because you have a minority religious sect which contains much of the power or holds most of the power in Syria? Can it? Because we are arming the dictatorship in Bahrain, where a tiny minority religious sect holds almost all of the power. It can't be, can it, for any of those reasons. The real reasons are that they want to bring down the Syrian regime because that regime doesn't follow their orders, won't surrender to Israel, won't kick out the Palestinian resistance from Damascus, won't end its relationship with the Lebanese national resistance, which remains the only Arab army ever to defeat Israel in military conflict, a victory which it could not have won but for that strategic alliance that it had with Damascus. They want to bring down the Syrian regime because it didn't play ball on the invasion and in the subsequent occupation of Iraq. So these people play these sectarian games, and even those currently benefiting from it should beware. People in the House of Commons who don't know where Saudi Arabia is on the map have approached me over the last year or so, and especially in the last few weeks, asking about the Hijaz and Najd. I was astonished. How do they even know these terms? Suddenly they learned these terms. Why? Because already they're thinking, maybe we have to divide what is called Saudi Arabia, and maybe we have to tell the Shiites in the eastern province that actually we might be prepared to support you having your own country because you've got all the oil, and we're not all that interested in Mecca and Medina, believe me. The West is very happy to leave that to the Arabs and the Muslims. What they're interested in is Saudi Arabia's wealth, and if it becomes unstable enough in Saudi Arabia, you'll discover a new love in the West for the oppressed Shiites in Saudi Arabia. Trust me on that. It's already beginning to happen. We'll hear about the oppression of the Shiites in the eastern province. We'll hear about the scandal that it is that they should be governed in the way by these Wahhabi fanatics. So nobody is safe from this kind of division. Nobody is safe from this kind of sectarianism. And what will be the result? Instead of 23 Arab countries, we'll have 33 or 43 or 63. We won't have countries at all. We'll have emirates like the one currently visible emerging in Libya after the NATO bombardment and the overthrow of the Gaddafi dictatorship. It would suit them well, because then they could divide and rule the Arabs for another 100 years most securely. Thank you very much. You have to know this. The West has no interest in Islam. The West has no interest in differences in Islam. The West has no differences no interest in the situation of Christians in the Middle East. We used to hear it in Lebanon. The West was supporting the Christians in Lebanon. But they're not supporting the Christians in Syria, who are terrified at the possible victory of an Al-Qaeda type insurrection there. They're not supporting the Christians in Palestine, almost all of whom have been given green cards to leave the country and forget it. Please don't think that they care about your religions. Please don't think that they care about your confession, your particular sect. They only care about continuing to own and control the Arab world because of the wealth which lies underneath it and because of the strategic importance which it holds and continues to hold.